It's the town that drowned that a lot of people have probably never heard of. Willow Grove in Clay County was a bustling community until 1942. In the water just below this white buoy is where the old Willow Grove School once stood. It, along with other buildings in the town, have been gone now for 76 years. Mary Lloyd Renault, who serves as president of the Clay County Museum, spent a few months researching the history of the town and has some interesting stories she wants to share with us.
Willow Grove, which is a land that's in Clay County, Tennessee. The first people that ever came to Willow Grove, we believe, were around the Revolutionary War. And they came down from the New York colonies down through the Cumberland Gap and settled in this spot that they called Willow Grove. Now there's a question about where the name came from. Some people say it was from the people who moved in there at that time, that they were from a little town in Willow Grove in New York. But later on we find out that there was a spring in the area where willow trees grew, so you just take your choice, whichever you want to tell how it was named. Now, there was like 4 or 5 families that came in, and one's name was Irons, and there was a Barber and a Stone and a Hill and several others, and a Mitchell family. Those names that are what popped up. There's probably more later on. And when they got here, they ran upon an Indian chief named Chief Nettle Carrier, and they lived there and had settled there for a while, and they got along with them real good. There wasn't any trouble. They didn't think the Indians were supposed to be killed right then, so they just lived with them and they did everything. And actually, some of them acquired land from Nettle Carrier. So that's kind of where the actual first inhabitants that we knew about Willow Grove came. But as time went on, this Mr. Irons had a daughter by the name of Rachel, and there was a surveyor that came to the area who was surveying for the government, William Dale, and Mr. Dale married Mr. Irons' daughter, Rachel. So as time went on, they were a big part of that area, the Ironses and the Dales and the families and everything. And William Dale had gotten some land from Nettle Carrier because Nettle Carrier thought he had title to it and everything. But as time went on, that in 1795, but right before Tennessee became a state, John Sevier was granted 25,000 acres of North Carolina, and he then became the owner of all this land that was around there. And his family lived there, different ones and everything. But later, when Tennessee was admitted to the Union in 1796, the state didn't recognize these land grants that these earlier people that had. So they had to, go ahead and find, they bought some land from somebody else and everything. And this William Dale eventually bought land down, which is close to where the Dale Hollow Dam is right now. And his family kind of trickled down through there, and he had 11 kids. 6 of the boys went to the Confederacy. They went on down and lived down there in the land they owned. And once Nettle Carrier and it got to be more people around in the area, the Indians moved to Arkansas. But every now and then, during the hunting season, they would come back to hunt in that area because it was a good hunting area. And finally, William Dale ended up with 449 acres down by the dam. And then he had gotten a land grant from when he was in the war War of 1812 with Andrew Jackson. So, that's kind of where the lake came to be named that and everything. But the old man Dale, the Daddy Dale, I'll call him, he drowned on the Mississippi River in 1836. So the rest of the family stayed on. He had a daughter that married a Matthew Davis. So that land stayed in that Dale family until Dale Hollow Dam was built and finished in 1942. Now, all at once then, all these people that lived in Willow Grove wanted their children to be educated. And they started some schools, but we really didn't find out a lot about the schoolhouses and everything, so we assumed that they went to people's houses and had their lessons and all this kind of stuff. And there was a lot of, people, a lot of times, early times, they didn't have school but like 3 months because of the growing seasons and all this. But then after that, somebody came in with what they called a subscription school, and it cost you so much a day to go and had to board in and everything. So some of them could maybe have gone 6 months to school. But then when we get up to 1870, Clay County was established. So that put Willow Grove, which had been in Overton County, because Clay was formed out of Jackson and Overton. And but Willow Grove, the Obie River came by Willow Grove, but the Cumberland River came by Salina, which was the big river. So as time went on, for Willow Grove to progress, they had to get all their supplies and stuff from Salina. And they would have to come down the river in flatboats, pole them, because they had to pole the shoals and everything. So they would come down to there and get the stuff and bring their stuff to market, who would put on the river boats and go down. It would be sent down to New Orleans or wherever they needed to sell them. And, there was, the roads weren't real good back then and everything. And so there was a group of men that got together as time came on to try to get the roads built and get some bridges put in, because they were having to ford the river just to even walk to Salina and everything. As time went on, things became better, and people got to, they built houses, and they had stores and filling stations, a grocery store, a couple of different ones, a bank and everything. But it was, when Clay County was established, it was not considered as one of the towns that might be the county seat. Butler's Landing and Salina was, because they were both on the Cumberland River, which was where all the access was. About in 1820, men came to the area and started surveying some, and everybody wanted to know what they were doing. Well, they wouldn't tell, they were just surveying, and this went on, and that went on, and everything. So nobody thought too much about it. But then, by that time, they had built a schoolhouse and everything, and the people were really entrenched in the area in which they lived. This land that this lake took when it was filled up was the richest and the best land in this county. And it was really hard for these people when they found out that there may be a lake or something, and that wasn't really known until the 1930s particularly. And there was a lot of controversy on why are they doing this, and what's going on, and this, that, and the other. But, when the government decides they're going to do something, they're going to do it. So they condemned the land, and everybody had to start trying to think, where are we going to go? Now, in the old school building that was standing there in the 30s, they decided that they needed to be considering a new school building. So they tore this building down, and as they were digging in the foundation, they dug into a grave. Well, all at once they realized that this man named Irons, that had been there years upon years ago, had a son that had been a horseman, and he had bought him a horse, and he was riding through the woods, hit a tree, hit a limb, hit something, and it killed him. Well, he had buried him on the highest knoll in Willow Grove area. Well, not knowingly, when they built this first schoolhouse, it was on top of that grave. So as they dug in, they found this walnut grave box with the body in it. And this was about 1935. And that happened to be the year that my mother from Nashville married my daddy, and they lived here. And of course, when that news hit Salina, everybody ran to Willow Grove to see what was going on. And my mother got to look into the coffin. she said there wasn't anything there but some hair and some buttons. So I think they were all disillusioned that there wouldn't be just a body laying there and everything. So they couldn't decide what they were going to do about the casket. So they decided to put the casket back where it was and to build the new school building over right on the same spot where the old school building had been. And as time went on, the school was, when they got the new building built in about 38, you know, of course, it hadn't been finalized. They'd been buying the land, but it wasn't all being condemned and everything. They just did it in portions and stuff. So there was people, though, that moved, that were displaced or were going to be displaced, we found out, went to 19 different states, and a lot of them just moved across the county line or just to Livingston or Cookville or someplace local. A lot came into Salina. And as the construction, you know, kept going on, a lot of the people by the name of Clarks, who were the doctors, Sidwells, who were the lawyers, Bufords, who ran a store, Upchurches had the filling station, the Hayes and Martins had a store, there was a Dr. Gray, there were Cherries, there were Garretts, and I know I talked to a family, Garrett family, that the son was about 5 years old, and he could remember being at their house in Willow Grove, and they've showed me where their house was on a map, and I know right where it is. It's under the water now, but that's the way it was. And a lot of the, they had the big school, the high school and stuff at Willow Grove, but there were always smaller schools out in the other areas, like Fox Springs, which was downriver maybe 5 or 6 miles. And they had a school and maybe a store. And at one time, my grandmother, Della Renault, had taught school down there. And we always said, well, she did a little bit of everything, because after the lake was born, she did other things. So she raised a family. And you know, as the stories got about building the dams, people were so upset because they loved it where they were. That's why they were there, because the land was so good and everything. And when a lot of these fellas who, something but like 800 to 1,000 went to the war between the states. And when they came back, there was nothing, their land was in shambles. But they overcame that, and they built this town back to like it was before, and if not better. Now all you can really see of Willow Grove town, when the lake is down low, you can see some of the foundation. When it's higher, if you're in an airplane or stuff, you might be able to see the foundation of the new schoolhouse. The new schoolhouse was built in 38 with the body of the boy still in under there. And some of them said that sometime when the fishermen go over, they think, well, wonder he's going to jump out and get us, you know. But we decided that wouldn't happen, because if the Corps couldn't get the concrete off of him to get his body out, that he's still probably right there. And back in 2008, the lake was low for a time, and me and my sister and my nephew and his wife, Johnny and Joanne McLaren and Corinne McLaren, went out to Willow Grove, and they stood on while I made the pictures of the steps that came up to Willow Grove where you would walk right in, and it was dry. Johnny could walk around the foundation and not get it over his boots, and could stand on the corner of one of them. The lake has been lower than that at times, because I had seen it one time during my life that I could stand inside the foundation and it be dry. That was back in the 50s or 60s when my parents ran a boat dock, Holly Creek boat dock on the lake. So I kind of grew up knowing where all these places were in under the lake, because my dad and I fished. And we did, you know, he would tell me, there's a road here. This is where somebody's house was, this kind of thing. But the town of Willow Grove will probably never be forgotten, because so many prominent people came out of that town. And one of them was Cordell Hull. He came from a little north of there, but he first came to school at Willow Grove before his family moved on to Salina. But the people who came from Willow Grove, there are still people who regret the dam being built because their lives were uprooted and changed. I talked to a lady who was 102 years old last week, or a few days back, and she had lived at Fox Springs as a child. She was a Buford, but she married and was a Garrett that lived up at Willow Grove then. That was her son I was telling about that told me where they lived and everything. And they still understand the hard feelings that people had. And I know Uncle Bob Riley, who was a riverboat captain and a logger who logged up and down the Obie River from up above Willow Grove all the way to Salina, because they rafted logs down to Salina to get them on down to Nashville. His family lived at Fox Springs, and actually one of his granddaughters was a teacher of mine in school. And she used to tell us about that when she was little, and that their house, they had these big trees, and they all played in them all the time. Well, they were having to move out, and they said, the men came to cut the trees, and they says, well, would you all just leave the trees until we leave? And the workmen just kind of laughed at them and cut the trees right in front of them and everything. And when they cleared Dale Hollow Lake, and they stacked the wood and they burned it. They wouldn't let people have it that needed it, but they did that, you know, and everything. But Uncle Bob Riley had a little log cabin, so he got it moved before the lake got gone, and it was moved up on Pea Ridge, and my sister got a hold of it, and it actually sits on the Obie River in Salina. Later on, as things you know, kind of calmed down, the lake was finished filling up in '42. Everybody had moved and everything, but as the lake filled up, it filled up faster than the Corps of Engineers thought it would. And there were things left in under the lake that people couldn't get out because there was no roads to get them out, and that's just the way it was. Well, in 1987, some divers found the steam engine that was left under the lake. And it happens to sit on our property here at the museum under our pavilion. And these divers finally got it up and took it over to Willow Grove Dock, and they, because it was in the lake, the Corps of Engineers claimed it. Well, they got it restored, and they said, well, we're going to leave it here at Willow Grove Dock and everything. So it stayed there for several years. Well, they didn't have a place to put it under cover or everything. So as time went on, we built a pavilion, and they let us have the steam engine. So if you really want to know more about the steam engine and stuff, we've got the whole story for you here at the museum in Salina, so you can come and take pictures and look at it and tell the whole story. And anything else that you'd like to know about Willow Grove, we can probably find it. If some of your people were there, we may have somebody that knows. I think the lake is the only thing that a lot of people walk in here and ask us, well, tell us about the town that was covered up by the lake. And that is probably the biggest thing about the town, not about the struggles that the people had and what they went through. Probably unless you have been in an area where your land has been taken for eminent domain or something like that, would you understand how the people felt about the land here? Everybody is real private about their land. They don't want just anybody around their land because it's theirs, and that's one of the reasons why, because a lot of them, the families that live here now, were families of people who lived in Willow Grove at one time. And so I think it was hard for the older folks, you know, than it is now.
Willow Grove literally drowned 76 years ago. But as long as Mary Lloyd Renault is still living, she says the town will never die. Reporting in Clay County, Barry Hyatt, NCTV.